Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, July 28th, 2017, and you're tuned in to episode 298 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Our top story of the day is the news out of Washington, D.C. that Attorney General Jeff Sessions does not yet plan to crack down on the marijuana industry, at least via his task force on crime reduction and public safety. As I've reported on in recent days, the AG was set to release an update on the work of that task force, formed at the behest of President Vladimir Trump, that many in the reform community feared would be the start of a federal crackdown on the marijuana industry. Instead, Attorney General Sessions released a statement on Wednesday that was rather milquetoast in content, making no specific policy recommendations and keeping it short with 2 paragraphs that basically said, "People have told me things, I'm looking at those things, and we'll get back to you later." Mary Jane has a good piece up that pulls in all the details on this one, but one of the things that I thought was interesting was the question of whether Sessions is just too busy defending himself against both indictment and a president that's taken to criticizing him at every opportunity for his decision to recuse himself from the Russian investigations. Speaking of Attorney General Sessions, Tom Angel over at MassRoots jumps all over the news that broke yesterday that the U.S. Senate Appropriations Committee approved a legislative rider to a funding bill that prevents the federal government from interfering in state legal medical marijuana, rejecting a direct plea made by Attorney General Sessions that they free him and his department to go after the medical industry. The amendment passed by the Appropriations Committee was sponsored by Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, who told reporters after the vote, quote, "I don't want them spending money pursuing medical marijuana patients who are following state law. We have more important things for the Justice Department to do than tracking down doctors or others, epileptics, who are using medical marijuana legally in their state." Unquote. Taken together with the first headline, this one made for a pretty bad week for Attorney General Sessions, with all other things considered. Our final top story of the day is the boost in value from $70 million to $250 million that High Times Holding Corporation said they are now worth, following their recent acquisition by a group of investors led by California-based Adam Levine and ahead of their just-announced planned listing as a public company on the NASDAQ stock exchange. High Times says their post-acquisition valuation is supported by the strong growth in the overall legal cannabis market, combined with the brand awareness and loyalty they've built up over the last 43 years. We'll obviously keep tracking this one as they approach their actual entry into the public market. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out on headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor and friends over at Extractioneering, makers of fine legal cannabis extracts and concentrates. If your local marijuana dispensary doesn't carry Extractioneering products, tell them they need to. Led by Dr. Dan Hayden, a trained PhD biochemist with as much experience in the professional lab setting as he does in marijuana cultivation facilities, Extractioneering delivers the highest quality cannabis crumbles, syrups, and sugars. See the results of their work for yourself by swinging over to extractioneering.com, which is spelled like engineering, both the word extraction. All right, time for the blitz. Bloomberg has an important piece to open up and dive into as it looks into the conundrum faced by Canadian stock markets as some of their listed licensed medical marijuana firms start to invest their money in the U.S. legal marijuana market, where federal law still designates marijuana as illegal. This is a problem because the stock exchanges require their listed companies to follow all applicable rules and regulations wherever they should operate. That's obviously not possible anywhere in the US, where, again, federal law holds cannabis to be illegal. As more states continue to legalize marijuana in both medical and adult use forms, businesses getting into the industry face the same problems that legal cannabis veterans have been dealing with for years: the lack of access to good business banking services. As I've reported on in recent days, the city of Los Angeles is studying the merits of a plan that would see them form a city-owned bank to service legal marijuana businesses operating within its limits. The same idea has been floated on a statewide level by Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, and the LA Times did a good job jumping into answering some of the questions that pop up around the idea of forming a cannabis-specific bank. Swing on over and open it up for the full read. As always, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com and on our Twitter account at mjtodaydaily. While you're over at the LA Times, you might also want to read their story about the money that Lieutenant Governor Newsom is raising from the California legal marijuana industry as he runs for governor. With $14 million in his campaign bank account, Newsom has pulled in more than $300,000 in donations from cannabis investors, cultivators, processors, and dispensers. While the cannabis money is a relatively small part of his war chest, it's certainly enough to serve as a marker of the evolution of the California marijuana industry. We swing out to Colorado for this one, where a group of citizens in Colorado Springs is agitating for their city to allow adult use marijuana sales, pointing out that they could be leaving up to $20 million a year in tax revenue on the table. Colorado Springs allows for medical dispensaries to operate, but adult use consumers have to make a drive outside city limits to buy their products, taking their tax revenue with them. The group, Citizens for Safer Neighborhoods, hired a University of Denver economics professor to calculate that total and presented it to the Colorado Springs City Council, along with a plea to legalize adult use sales within the city. In addition to the lost tax revenue, which is estimated to rise to more than $25 million in 2018, legal adult use sales would also create more than 1,000 jobs in the area. In response, a few members of the city council expressed some openness to the idea of allowing adult use sales, though the mayor of the conservative city rejected the tax revenue estimates outright as not being based on his city's actual tax structure. State regulators in Ohio have released the application that universities can use to apply to become one of the state's licensed medical marijuana testing facilities. Ohio's medical marijuana program is set to come online next year, and state law gives first dibs on the testing industry to state universities for the first year. A district judge in Montana rejected a challenge to his state's laws regarding driving under the influence of marijuana, specifically the limit the state imposes of 5 nanograms of THC metabolites per milliliter of blood. The challenge has been raised in the case of a driver involved in a fatal car crash that saw him charged with vehicular homicide, who was tested and found to have a THC metabolite concentration of 19 nanograms per milliliter of blood. His lawyer argued, unsuccessfully as it turned out, that the limit of 5 nanograms was arbitrary, not based on sound science, and unconstitutional. In his ruling yesterday, District Judge Gregory Todd denied that challenge, saying that even if 5 nanograms was arbitrary, the intent of the law in reducing marijuana use by drivers meant that the constitutionality of the law stood. And finally for today, Florida's Sun Sentinel covered the issue of medical marijuana use and state employment law following the recent decision in a Massachusetts court that lays out some protections for medical marijuana users from being fired for their use of medical cannabis. Due to some similarities in Florida and Massachusetts medical marijuana laws, Kelly Cronenberg, a legal specialist working in Fort Lauderdale, thinks Florida companies should review their policies to be more accommodating of medical marijuana users. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again Monday morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our Twitter account at MJTodayDaily and visit our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, Extractioneering, and to all of our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the patron listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.